Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, you're where you're supposed to be. And that's none other than TV Courtroom, hosted by yours truly, attorney Michael Cord, aka Michael X, aka the angriest black man in America. Today we got a lot of stuff. Well, not a lot of stuff, it's two topics in particular, but because these topics are so important, I decided that I wouldn't have any guests today. You know, as we normally do, we have guests to provide informative commentary, but today I got a whole lot I need to get in regarding two particular topics. So I said I'd go solo this month, which by the way is March of 2023, and then next month, April of 2023, as well as May and June, July, so on and so forth. I'd make sure that I have some special guests to help enlighten you. But today, as I said, I want to go solo because there are two topics that will take up a lot of time and I want to get it all in. So folks, there's going to be an exam at the end of this presentation. So make sure you mark this down. Two topics. One, real black judges matter. Number two, the worst quote unquote slave auction in American history occurred exactly 164 years ago, as of May 2nd and May 3rd. It was a 48-hour thing. It happened exactly 164 years ago, from May 2nd to May 3rd, 1859. You might say, well, that's horrific, but why are you talking about it here on TV Courtroom? Well, because what happened exactly 164 years ago, March 2nd, March 3rd, March 2nd, March 3rd, 164 years ago, as of the year 1859, that largest quote unquote slave auction in American history was tied to Philadelphia, connected to Philadelphia, a part of Philadelphia. So we got to talk about that. It's not the kind of thing that you should not know about. In fact, you should know about it. But because the American educational system is what it is, you probably don't. So remember, two topics. One, real black judges matter. Two, the largest quote unquote slave auction in American history with ties to Philadelphia. Now you notice I'm doing the air quotes in regard to slave. I'm doing that because those of us in the African tradition, in fact, those of us in the intellectual tradition, we know that our ancestors weren't slaves. A slave is a thing. Our ancestors weren't things. They were human beings who were enslaved. And they were human beings who were enslaved because they, good people, didn't have guns. The other folks, Europeans, the bad people, did have guns. So don't call my ancestors slaves. They were not slaves. They were not things. They were human beings who were enslaved. But for the sake of some historical discussions, we might have to use that word slave, but understand we're using it for a specific purpose. So when I say the worst slave auction in American history, there's a reason for that. And I'll get into that. But remember the two topics today. One, real black judges matter. And two, the worst quote unquote slave auction in American history has ties to Philadelphia. Well, let's jump into the first topic first. That's the real black judges matter. And I want to get into that because you know Brother Malcolm, and if you are watching us on TV Courtroom, you can see over my left shoulder an image of Brother Malcolm. And Brother Malcolm said a lot of profound things, not the least of which is one of my favorite, which is the ballot or the bullet. He understood that change had to happen for Black folks in America, had to happen, no doubt about it. And why did change have to happen? It's very simple. Our experience on this land that became America started August 25, 1619, 403 years ago. And it's been held every day since then. Now, More recently, the hell hasn't been on high heat, but it's still on heat. Now, that's not to say that, hey, everything's fine for Black folks in America. Quite the contrary. It's horrific for Black folks in America. And if you think it's bad today in 2023, and it is, can you imagine 1923, 1823, 1723, 1623, and at the beginning, August 25, 1619, in the Virginia colony, when the first approximately 20 to 30 Black folks, 20 to 30 Africans, 20 to 30 Angolans were held enslaved on the land that in 1776 became the United States of America. And by the way, although I don't have enough time to talk to you about who the bad guy is in this whole slavery story, because more recently there's been information that's been put out there that, hey, well, Black people enslaved Black people, so you can't blame Europeans for doing it. Man, if I didn't respect Philly Cam as much as I do, I'd curse you out for saying something like that. There's always been what we call man's inhumanity to man, which means that, yeah, Africans treated other Africans horribly in many cases. Asians treated other Asians horrifically in many occasions. And guess what? Europeans did the same thing. So every group has oppressed to a certain extent its own people. But unlike what the Asians did, unlike what the Africans did, unlike what any other ethnic group did, the people today we call white people, the people we call Caucasians, the people we call Europeans, they did something that no other people did. They traveled. And when they traveled to foreign lands, every land they went to, they raped, they robbed, they pillaged, they oppressed, and they colonized. Everywhere. As bad as it was for Africans doing what they did to each other, they did that at home. As bad as it was for many Asians who did what they did to each other, they did that at home. Those groups, no groups, brown groups, red groups, yellow groups, and Black groups, none of them went outside of their homeland to rape, to rob, to pillage, to oppress, and to colonize. Only one group done that. So don't tell me that Black folks who quote unquote enslaved other Black folks were just as bad as the Europeans, because Black folks didn't enslave other Black folks. Black folks didn't sell other Black folks into slavery. You might say, well, they captured certain Black nations, captured other and defeated other Black nations, and they sold those defeated people to the Europeans. Yeah, they did, but they didn't sell them into slavery. What Africans did was, just like any nation, by the way, we know about domestic assault and domestic violence, where inside your own house, well, maybe not your own house, but inside certain family households, people commit violence against each other. Husbands attack wives, mothers, sons, daughters, sisters, brothers. Inside the house, there's stuff that goes on, and sadly, bad stuff that goes on. That happens not almost everywhere. That happens in a lot of places. But you notice these people in their houses, they don't go outside and do that. That's what Europeans did. Africans in their household did bad stuff to each other, no doubt about it. Asians in their household did bad things to each other. Latinx, Latino people in their own household did bad things to each other. Everybody did, but unlike those brown people, unlike those yellow people, unlike those red people, and unlike those Black people, the white people did something different. They went outside of their own household and did all these horrific things. And by the way, let me make this final point before I get back to the election and Black Judges Matter. When Black nations warred with other Black nations, once the victorious nation conquered the defeated nation, they would capture those soldiers and make those soldiers work as laborers. But it was only the soldiers. The defeated soldiers had to labor for the nation that defeated them, but only the defeated soldier, not the soldier's wife, not the soldier's son, not the soldier's daughter. More, in addition to that, that defeated soldier kept his name, kept his language, kept his land, kept his religion, kept everything that was human about him. It's almost like people go to prison today. Yeah, they lose their freedom, but they remain themselves. They keep their identities. That's what Black nations in Africa did to defeated Black nations in Africa. They respected the humanity of the conquered person. So African nations, I don't like the word tribes, but African nations, when they were encountered by white folks and white folks wanted to, quote unquote, buy some people from the defeated nations, those Black people thought that, okay, I'm going to, quote unquote, sell this defeated soldier to this European, but that Europeans are going to treat that defeated African the same way I treated that defeated African. He keeps his land, he keeps his language, he keeps his religion. It doesn't affect his wife, doesn't affect his children, doesn't affect his family. It's like, again, somebody going to prison today in 2023. They keep about them the humanity. Well, for Europeans, it was something completely different. So don't tell me Black folks sold other Black folks into slavery, because they didn't. Black folks thought that the European treated defeated nations with the same respect and humanity that African nations did. It wasn't until much later Africans found out that what Europeans were was a different type of conquering. I got to talk to you more about that in a separate episode. Let me get to the two topics. Time now is already 3:41. I got up on my soapbox and I couldn't stop. So let me get off of it and get to the two topics. Remember, it's going to be an exam at the end. First topic, real Black judges matter. Second topic, the worst, quote unquote, slave auction in American history occurred exactly 164 years ago. I'm speaking to you on Friday, March 3, 2023. From March 2nd, 1859 until March 3rd, 1859, the largest quote unquote slave auction in American history took place, and it has ties to Philadelphia. That's the second topic. I'll get to that in just a few minutes. Let's start with this. As I pointed out, Brother Malcolm said profoundly that it's either the ballot or the bullet. In other words, he was saying that because of the hell that Black folks have been through and still are going through, that must change. And that change will come about only through violence, the bullet, or nonviolence, the ballot. It's no way that I would advocate violence. So even Malcolm didn't advocate violence. He said you had to do what you had to do when you had to do it. And don't tell me, oh, he kind of talking about violence, because as I recall, remembering my American history, didn't the founding fathers, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and the rest of them, Ben Franklin, didn't they take up arms and engage in violence against the British crown? And their battle cry was no taxation without representation. They made a strong argument that, hey, how is it that the British government is coming to the 13 colonies here in America, making us pay taxes to the British crown, but we don't have any electoral or appointed representation in the British Parliament? So we're paying taxes to Britain. We don't have any elected or appointed representation. So they yelled out, no taxation without representation, a legitimate beef. But while they were yelling no taxation without representation, they were enslaving Black people. You talk about the height of historical hypocrisy. How the hell are you going to complain about somebody making you pay taxes when you're making somebody be a slave, quote unquote slave? If I'm going to be oppressed, I would much rather have the oppression where you take a few dollars from me than you take my humanity, my children's humanity, my descendants' humanity. So my point here is that don't get nervous when you hear people like Malcolm talk about the ballot or the bullet, especially the bullet part, and thinking he's advocating violence, because America, your founding fathers said the bullet and no ballot. At least Malcolm is giving us an option. And from that option, I select the ballot, because that's the only way that Black folks are going to get change here in America. Now, as you know, there's an election every 4 years. But there's an election more than every 4 years. It's not just the president of the United States that runs for office. There's Congress, there's governors, there's state senators, there's state representatives, there's mayors, there's city council persons, there's district attorneys, there's commissioners, there's register of wills, there's all that stuff. So it's not just that 4-year presidential thing. Every 6 months, twice a year, there's some kind of election going on in Philadelphia. And the next one here in the city of so-called brotherly love takes place on May 16, 2023. That's the primary election. I got to keep an eye on the clock here. It's now 3:45. I need to get through this in the next, say, 15, 17 minutes, because then I got to jump into the second topic. So in the next, say, less than 20 minutes, I'll wrap this up. And I know you're taking notes. I hope you're taking notes. You need to. There's going to be a test at the end. So first thing, elections take place more than every 4 years. It's not just about the president. It's the president on down to dog catcher. Or maybe not dog catcher, but there's certain local elections. There's city commissioner, there's register of wills, there's DA, there's sheriff, there's all that kind of stuff, city council. So it's not every 4 years, it's every 6 months. Well, I'm speaking to you now in March. In the next couple months, in May, will be the primary. What that means is this: before candidates can run in the main election, the general election, they have to see who's going to be their representative, who's going to be selected by their party. And I know we got a whole bunch of parties, but primarily in most major cities, you're talking about the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Now, I don't like either one of them, but I hate the Republican Party, and I kind of sort of tolerate the Democratic Party because, as you all know, here in America, at least on the federal level, there is no real Republican Party. It's the fascist party. It's the MAGA party. It's the white nationalist party. It's the Proud Boys party. And that's a frightening concept. Often we would call Republicans fascist. And it could kind of sort of be hyperbole when you're talking about other administrations. Don't get me wrong. I'm no fan of Reagan and no fan of Nixon and no fan of Bush 1 and 2. But it seemed to me there was a line that they wouldn't cross. As right-wing and fanatical and racist as they were, because don't get me started about Reagan and supporting apartheid with that constructive engagement nonsense. Don't get me started with Nixon and how he had a plan to imprison as many Black people as possible by making it appear that they were using drugs and committing crimes more than anybody else. So I'm no fan of any Republican. Don't get it twisted. But there's a difference, it seems to me, between racism, horrific racism from the Republican side, and her racism plus fascism. It's all worthy of harsh condemnation. But what we have now with the Republican Party is not just racism, and they ought to be outrageously condemned. As I said, Nixon and Reagan and Bush, all monsters. Don't get it twisted. But you got something new here now, where these Republicans have gone beyond that. They've taken that horror of racism and given it steroids. And now it's, I used to call it creeping fascism, but when you see elected officials talking about burning books and dehumanizing certain groups of people, didn't Hitler do that? Didn't Stalin do that? Didn't Francisco Franco do that? Didn't Pol Pot do that? And didn't, and this is an important name and people really need to remember when we talk about horrific leaders who did horrific things. What about King Leopold in Belgium? What he did in Africa was worse than any single individual did to any group of people. He was responsible for the slaughter of anywhere between, say, 12 and as many as 15 Africans. Think about that. So when we talk about these horrific monsters, you hear right-wing fascist leaders in America's political party, in particular, Republican Party, embracing that. legitimizing that and calling for that. We used to call it creeping fascism, but it's not creeping anymore, it's sprinting. But here's the thing, how do we fight that fascism? Remember what Malcolm said, the ballot or the bullet? We're not at that bullet stage, we're at the ballot stage. So the only way we stop that is by rallying around and voting. And people might say, well, voting hasn't changed anything. Well, if you say that, you're just plain stupid. Now, I know that might sound offensive and kind of harsh to people, but if you say that voting hasn't changed anything ever, then you're stupid. You don't know history. What about the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Civil Rights Act of 1964? What about the Voting Rights Act of 1965? What about affirmative action? What about minimum wage? What about HBCUs? What about all those things? Now, please understand what I'm saying. This is not heaven for Black people, but it's a gradual process, because those of you who say that voting never changed anything, and if you're Black and you say that, then voluntarily go back to 1923. Voluntarily go back to 1823. Voluntarily go back to 1723. Voluntarily go back to 1623 and ask yourself, where would you rather be? And the reason why you'd rather be in 1723 than 1623, 1823 rather than 1723, 1923 rather than 1823, and 2023 rather than any of them is because of changes that have taken place in large part due to voting. So we got to vote. And those of you who don't vote, if you're Black, you're a traitor. What? Did I say that people who don't vote and are Black are traitors? Yeah, you're a traitor. Why? I'm not just saying this to insult anybody. I'm not just saying this to offend anybody. I'm saying it because it's a legal fact. What do I mean by that? The legal definition of a traitor is found in a legal definition of treason. In other words, you're a traitor if you engage in treason. What's the legal definition of treason? The legal definition of treason is, quote, anyone who does anything to give aid and comfort to the enemy, unquote. Anybody who does anything to give aid and comfort to the enemy. So if you give aid and comfort to the enemy, you've engaged in treason. If you've engaged in treason, you're a traitor. Black people who don't vote engage in treason. Why? Because they give aid and comfort to the enemy. You see where Republicans, they've done it pretty much all their time since the 1950s when they became the party they became. And by the way, the Republicans of today are not the Abe Lincoln Republicans. Anybody who tells you that the Republicans were the one who fought against the Klan, Republicans are the one who fought against the South in the Civil War, they're lying to you. Although they had the same name back then, the Republicans of that era were the relatively progressive party. So today's Republican Party is not only not the same as the Republican Party of the 17 and 1800s, today's Republican Party is the exact opposite of that. We'll talk more about that in future segments of TV Courtroom. But here's the thing. I call Black people don't vote traitors because they give aid and comfort to the enemy. The enemy, the white racist Republicans of today, they've been trying to pass all types of laws to preclude Black people from voting, passing all types of laws to make it difficult for Black folks to vote. And if our enemy does not want to vote, and there are Black people who voluntarily choose not to vote, you've helped the enemy. You've given aid and comfort to the enemy. And if you've done that, you've committed treason. And if you've committed treason, you are a traitor. There are three basic reasons why all Black people should vote. Three basic reasons. The first one is this. The first rule of warfare is find out what your enemy doesn't want you to do, and then you do that. For example, if nations are at war and one nation knows the other nation cannot resist an air attack, well, you send your Air Force. If you find out the other nation can't stand a sea attack, you send your Navy. If you find out that your enemy can't withstand a ground attack, you send your Army. So you find out what your opponent doesn't want you to do, and then you do that. In boxing, you realize that your opponent can't withstand a left hook. What do? You throw a left hook. You find out your opponent can't stand a right jab. What do? You throw a right jab. So you find out what your enemy cannot withstand, and you do that thing. Our enemy cannot withstand correction. Our enemy doesn't want us to vote. So that's exactly what we do. Because your enemy doesn't want you to vote, that's what you do. That's why all these laws have been passed in so many states to restrict our right to vote. And you're telling me, black man, black woman, black boy, black girl, black person, you're telling me that you're not voting? Yeah, you're a traitor. So the first reason all blacks should vote is, one, racists don't want us to vote. That's why we should. The second thing, people often say that they vote because our ancestors died for our right to vote. Well, that's not really true. They didn't die for our right to vote. They were murdered for our right to vote. They weren't sitting back in their recliner at age 103 and just died peacefully in their sleep before they went to vote. No, they were beaten. They were assaulted. They were violated. They were lynched while trying to vote. So they were murdered. So if you saw your mother or father going to do something for your benefit, going into a school to get you an education, going into a supermarket to get you something to eat, or going into the polling booth to exercise their right to vote. And while they were doing that thing, whatever that thing was, voting, going to school, going to the supermarket, they were killed trying to do that for you. You wouldn't say, hey, mom and pop were killed trying to get me something to eat. Mom and pop were killed trying to get me an education. Mom and pop were killed trying to get me the right to vote, but I'm just going to let it pass. No, you're going to pick up that baton and you're going to run with it. So because your ancestors were murdered for your right to vote, you got to pick up that baton and run with it. That's the second reason. Third reason is this. As an attorney, I can tell you, it's so important to have woke black people and woke white people, woke others on juries. Do you know how the system selects people to be on the jury? It's two basic ways. One, from motor vehicle records, and from, you guessed it, voting records. So if you own a motor vehicle, or if you vote, there's a greater chance that you'll be put in for a jury, greater chance you'll be selected for a jury, greater chance that you'll be one of the jurors who can deal with these police brutality cases, where you see cops brutally murder black people on video and white jurors, like they did when Rodney King got beaten almost to death. And you see it right there on the video, but the jury in Simi Valley, California looks at the video and say, no harm, no foul. A cop here in Philadelphia, a black cop here in Philadelphia, brutally assaults a Latino woman, a Latinx woman. The judge sees that and throws the case out, despite the fact it's all on video. So I'm saying, by you registering to vote, your chances increase for you to be selected on a jury. And once you're selected on a jury, you can do the right thing. You can do justice. Those are the three reasons black folks gotta vote. Now, check this out. Clearly, in the upcoming election, by the way, that's the May primary that's going to take place on May 16, 2023. There's also the general election, November 7th. The May primary decides who's going to represent a particular party in the November election. So basically, it's like the playoffs. The May primary is like the playoffs. Who's going to be the champion for the Republican Party? Who's going to be the champion for the Democratic Party? Whoever those two champions are, in May, they then go head to head against the other party. So the May primary is about the playoffs. It's about an intra-party battle. And once you select your representative, your nominee from your Republican Party, from your Democratic Party, or in some case from your third party, that person now goes to the championship game, goes to the November 7 general election to find out, is the Republican going to win? Is the Democrat going to win? Is the third party going to win? So put it this way, primary, May primary, that's the playoffs. November election, general election, that's the championship. So in Philly, it's interesting because the May primary, the playoffs, as it were, is basically the championship. You might say, Mike, what the hell are you talking about? Look at it this way, because numbers don't lie. Democrats outnumber Republicans 8-1 in Philadelphia, 8-1. So basically, whoever becomes the Democratic nominee in May is going to crush the Republican nominee in November because the Democrats outnumber the Republicans 8-1 in Philly. So what are you going to do with all the information? This is what you're going to do with the information. You're going to realize that there are several. In fact, let me do this, and I encourage folks to read this. I write a column in the Philadelphia Tribune. Actually, I write two columns. One comes out every Sunday. That's called Freedom's Journal. Every Sunday, Philadelphia Tribune, Freedom's Journal. And then once a month, the first Tuesday of each month, I write something called Black Dollars Matter. Well, great producer extraordinaire, Roland just put it up on the screen. Go to phillytrib.com, type in the name Cord, C-O-A-R-D, and type in Black Judges Matter. And in this coming Sunday's edition of the Philadelphia Tribune, under the heading Black Judges Matter, written by Michael Cord, C-O-A-R-D, just Google it, you'll find this article that I entitled Real Black Judges Matter. I don't just say black judges, I say real. Let me just read a little bit of this, and then we'll get back to our discussion. You can read all of this. Go to phillytrib.com, type in Cord, C-O-A-R-D, and type in Black Judges Matter. It'll come up. Let me just spend a couple seconds reading a pertinent part. It goes like this. I began my Real Black Judges Matter series here in the Tribune on January 12, and I did so in preparation for the May 16 primary election and the November 7 general election. By the way, I added the word real in front of the words Black Judges Matter because in the famous words of one of the greatest writers in American history, the great Zora Neale Hurston, here's what she said, quote, all skin folk ain't kinfolk, unquote. Let me repeat that. All skin folk ain't kinfolk. That means simply because you're black and running for judge doesn't mean you'll be a good judge. In fact, it could mean that you'll be a bad judge. Has anybody ever heard the name Clarence Thomas? So just because the judicial candidate is black, that kind of gets them in the door as far as woke black people are concerned, was it doesn't get them through the interview. Because there are some white candidates for different offices, judges and mayor and DA and city council, whatever, who might be better. Great example is the current DA, Larry Krasner. I described him when he first ran, described him when he ran the second time, and I will always describe him as, quote, the blackest white guy I know. And I say that when I look at white folks who do the right thing in whatever role they play. So in terms of being a DA, Larry Krasner has been blacker than any other DA we've had, even the so-called black one who was in before him. So it's not exclusively about color, but it primarily is about color. I look back at the great John Brown. John Brown, greatest white man in American history, a white man. Matter of fact, many people don't know this, but one of the reasons that John Brown's raid, John Brown's revolution at Harper's Ferry in Virginia, one of the reasons that it failed, well, it really didn't fail because it helped spark the Civil War and the North beat the South so slavery ended. So it didn't really fail, but it wasn't successful on that date. Why? Because a black person snitched on John Brown. Think about that. A black guy was on a train, one of the assistant conductors, waiters, butlers, whatever he was on train, as it's going through Harper's Ferry, Virginia, he sees John Brown and some other white guys and some black guys with guns ready to spark the revolution to end slavery. He snitches. He gets on the telegraph and lets the people ahead know that, hey, there's some white guys and some black guys with guns trying to end slavery. I don't want slavery to end. Master's good to me. So he snitched on John Brown. Military came in and were able to capture John Brown. I'm just saying that although race is not everything, it's damn near everything. Having said that, in the upcoming primary, there are many, and I repeat, many electoral offices available. And by electoral offices, I mean mayor, council persons, city controller, city commissioners, sheriff, register of wills, Supreme Court, Superior Court, Commonwealth Court, Common Pleas Court, and Municipal Court, along with three, at least so far, three ballot questions. So we got all that stuff. We got those 11 electoral offices, but the last five I mentioned are the most important. All the other ones are very, very important, but the most important of those 11 are five. What's those five? 1, Supreme Court. 2, Superior Court. 3, Commonwealth Court. 4, Common Pleas Court. 5, Municipal Court. Why are they so important? Because they're judges. And judges are more powerful and have more influence over your daily life than the mayor, than the governor, and even the president of the United States. Why? Because the mayor and the governor and the president, it's 4 things they cannot do, but judges can do. 1, a judge can take away your property by way of a seizure or property order or by imposing fines. Think about that. A judge can take away your property through a seizure order or a forfeiture order or by imposing fines. The judge can do that. The mayor can't do that. The governor can't do that. The president can't do that. By the way, time is 4:06. I'm going to wrap this up in the next 10 minutes so I can jump to my next topic. I did say I was going to make this about maybe 15, 20 minutes, but when the spirit moves me, I don't stop. I go where the ancestors tell me to go. But I am going to get this done quickly so I can get to the second topic. So the first thing that a judge can do is take away your stuff. Number 2, a judge can take away your children through a custody order. Think about that. Your flesh and blood, a judge can take them away from you. Number 3, a judge can take away your liberty, your freedom by throwing you in jail. Mayor can't do that. Governor can't do that. President can't do that. Number 4, a judge can take away your life by imposing the death penalty to kill you. Mayor can't do that. Governor can't do that. President can't do that. So when we talk about electoral offices, when we talk about the May primary coming up on May 16, we got to make sure that we know who these judicial candidates are. And the first Friday in May, I'll give you a list of all the judges who you should vote for. And by the way, when I say you should vote for, this comes from my opinion as a Black man and as an attorney for about 30 years, as a TV show host, as a radio show host, as a college professor, as a community activist, as a rabble rouser, a troublemaker, an agitator. All those things are great things to resist the system. And based on the experience I got from all those, I got information. Even the people who don't like me, of other races, and maybe even my own race, they respect me because they know that I'm about it when it comes to Black people. They know that I will not sell out. People might not like white folks or brown folks or yellow folks or red folks or Black folks. Some in those groups might not like what I say, but they respect me because they know that I live and love. I live for Black people because I have much love for Black people. And like Professor Griff, the Public Enemy, said, before I sell out, I get the hell out. And I will never sell out Black people. When I give you my recommendations for judges, it's not on behalf of Philly Cam. It's not on behalf of WRD Radio 96.1 FM. It's not on behalf of the Philadelphia Tribune. It's not on behalf of the Pennsylvania Capital Star that I write for. It's not on behalf of Philadelphia Magazine that I write for. It's not on behalf of Temple University where I work at. It's not on behalf of any of those entities. It's just me as an individual giving you my opinion, giving you my position based on extensive research, extensive experience, and most important, extensive Blackness. Quoting Public Enemy again, too Black, too strong. So I got the information, I'm sharing it with you. And the first Friday in May, prior to the May 16 election, I'm going to give you the whole list of candidates for every position: mayor, city council, city controller, city commissioner, sheriff, Register of Wills, Supreme Court, Superior Court, Commonwealth Court, Common Pleas Court, and Municipal Court. And I'm going to give you my recommendations and tell you who I'm strongly endorsing, and hopefully you'll do the right thing if you want to, as Brother Malcolm said, bring about change through the ballot. We're not talking about the bullet, at least not right now. We're not doing like the founding fathers did when they took up arms against the British Parliament. We're talking about using the ballot. We're talking about using the vote. And right now, today's show, I'm harping primarily on the 5 electoral offices pertaining to judges. That's why I mentioned the Supreme Court and the Superior Court and the Commonwealth Court and the Common Pleas Court and Municipal Court. And I'm going to give you my whole list of endorsed candidates in May. But today, let me just mention 3 names very quickly. And then later on, in a couple of months, I'll go into more detail. There's a sister by the name of Samantha J. Williams, one of the youngest candidates running for judge, but by far one of the sharpest lawyers running for judge. You talk about academic prowess, you're talking about legislative prowess. She worked in the city council writing legislation. So as a judge, she would be helping to implement. She would be helped, I should say, interpret. She'd be there to interpret the type of laws that she drafted. Very rarely can you say that there's a judge who not only knows how to interpret the law, but you got this candidate who helped write the law. Samantha J. Williams. You got to vote to elect her as judge. And then there's 2 brothers, one by the name of Joe Green. Joe Green now works in the DA's office. Prior to that, he worked as a defense attorney. Thorough, sharp brother, Joe Green, running for judge. Remember his name on May 16. There's another brother by the name of Kwawi Abdul Rahman. Brother is sharp, brother is thorough, licensed to practice not just in Pennsylvania, but in New Jersey, in Delaware, and even Florida. He's like a national globetrotter, running around fighting the good fight for people in need. He served as a public defender, handled homicide cases, he handled robbery, burglary, all that kind of stuff. But more important, any of that stuff, you talk about pro bono, and pro bono doesn't mean representing people for free. Pro bono means for the public good. Little Johnny, juvenile delinquent, running around robbing people. His mom comes to me and asks me to represent her pro bono. I'm like, you don't know what pro bono means, man. Pro bono doesn't mean represent your badass son for free. Pro bono means for the public good. That's what we get to brother Kwawi Abdul Rahman. He's so thorough when it comes to pro bono work. He's received an award, an honor, prestigious honor from the Philadelphia Bar Association. So remember those 3 names. If you want more information about them, check the Tribune, the Sunday Tribune. I wrote about them and you can get more information. Not only about those 2, Joe Green and Kwawi Abdul Rahman. And don't forget Samantha J. Williams. All that, just go to phillytrib.com, type in court and judges, and you'll see all that. In upcoming columns, I'm going to talk about other judges, but remember those 3 for the time being. There's much more I want to share with you, but the time now is 4:13, so I got about 12, 13 minutes to jump to a completely different topic, and that was the second one I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the show. And let me just read to you some of the language from this article entitled Worst, quote unquote, Slave Auction in America Occurred Exactly 164 years ago from today, when it took place on March 2nd and March 3rd of 1859, and it has ties to Philly. I'm going to quickly read this to you for a couple reasons. One, I want to stay focused, but the main reason is that I really get choked up and emotional when I think about slavery, when I think about auctions, and certainly, and especially when I think about what happened here. So maybe if I read it, I won't get so emotional and I can get through it. But let me just read this part to you. And by the way, for all this stuff, go to phillytrib.com, type in CORD, COARD, and just read the last 2, 3, 4 articles I wrote. Here's how it starts with the headline. Worst slave auction in American history occurred 164 years ago and has Philly connections. And then I write the following. It's 4:14. I got about 13 minutes left. Imagine now in 2023 that your child or your sibling or your spouse or your parents or any of your loved ones, including your beloved puppy and your beloved kitten, are suddenly snatched from you and sold off hundreds or thousands of miles away to a life correction, to a hell of 24/7 back-breaking labor, along with tortuously sadistic whippings and systemic brutal rapes. Then imagine such a hellish snatching involving over 400 Black men, Black women, and Black children. And then imagine such a hellish snatching of over 400 Black men, women, and children involving infants to senior citizens. And imagine it all taking place during one mere 48-hour period. Well, imagine no more, because it really happened exactly 164 years ago in America with direct ties to Philadelphia. And there's much more, but let me just cut to the chase. I then write the following. A Philadelphian by the name of Pierce Meese Butler is the heartless devil who organized the largest single sale of Black folks in this nation's history. And he did it precisely 164 years ago, from March 2 through March 3 of 1895 in Georgia. And today, as I'm doing the show, it's March 3. So exactly 164 years ago, a Philadelphian, a white man from Philly, was responsible for this. A total of 429 Black men, women, and children, including infants as young as 3 months to senior citizens as old as 58 years. Think about that. Babies as young as 3 months old, snatched basically from their mother's womb to be sold away hundreds of miles away, to be sold away thousands of miles away. And that mother will never see that baby again. That baby will never see that mother again. And then you got the oldest person, a 58-year-old man. So from 3 months young to 58 years, a total of 429 Black men, women, and children were sold in one auction that was so big it lasted for 2 days, from March 2, 1859 to March 3, 1859. By the way, in honor of those ancestors who went through that hell, unimaginable hell, we in the African tradition, we always say that when you call out names, people never actually died. They go off to the other side, but when you call out their names, they come back. So let me do this. The oldest of the 429 persons was a 58-year-old man named Bill. Let's say Bill and say Ashe. Ashe is a term we use in the African tradition. It simply means so be it. It means right on. It's a type of verbal and cultural and spiritual affirmation. That's why I just called out the name of 58-year-old Bill. And then we got the youngest. And these are babies, a mere 3 months old. And there were 5 of them. Actually, there were 6 of them. We got to remember all 6 names of these 3-month-old babies. We have in alphabetical order: number 1, Cheney; number 2, Grace; number 3, Hannah; number 4, Joe; number 5, Patty; number 6, Violet. Those babies, Cheney, Grace, Hannah, Joe, Patty, and Violet, didn't even know their mother or father, only 3 months old. They were snatched away and sold as part of a group of 429 Africans, sold and bought and auctioned and leased on that day. This maliciously inhumane auction was called the Weeping Time. And it was called the Weeping Time by our ancestors because they said this, and they wrote this down, that in addition to loved ones weeping frantically for each other, can you imagine the crying and the wailing and the sobbing among 429 people being snatched from each other. Can you imagine that? Can you just stop for a second and imagine that? 429 people crying about never seeing each other again. Well, it was called the weeping time because of that crying, but not just that crying. In addition to those human beings crying, the records show, quote, the heavens wept thunderously by pouring down rain nonstop for 2 full days. So the people crying and the skies crying. There's much more, but we don't have a whole lot of time. It's now 4:20. We got about 6-7 minutes left, so let me wrap this up. Now, the reason why this guy, Pierce Meese Butler, did this mega sale is because he was in debt to the banks, in debt to the lenders. And he said, well, hey, I might not have any cash on hand, but I own, quote unquote, own these black folks, so I can go ahead and sell them. But it was so many black folks in such a big auction that they couldn't do it on a typical auction block. You know that he had to lease a horse racetrack and stable in order to put all those people in for 2-3 days before the auction began. So where you would normally have horses in stables at the racetrack, you had human beings in those horse stables for 2-3 days, preparing to be bought and sold. So he used a place called the 10 Brock Racecourse, and this all took place in Savannah, Georgia. Let me just read this little part here. Approximately 4 to 6 days. In fact, I'm glad I've read that because I told you 2 or 3 days, it was longer than that. Here's the historical record, which I wrote in the article. And if you get my article, you can read it all. Here's what I wrote. Approximately 4 to 6 days before March 2nd, these enslaved black human beings were brought to the racetrack, and they all were quartered on the floor of the horse stables where they had to sleep. In those stables, they tensely waited to be scattered throughout the country to racist, sadist, rapist, and pedophiles waving money at the auction. And there's a white guy, a journalist by the name of Mortimer Thompson. He wrote for the New York Times, and he heard about it. He said it was so horrific, he had to sneak through undercover, and he documented everything that took place. The reason why we know as much as we do, big shout out to this white guy, Mortimer Thomas of the New York Times, who was able to sneak in and write about this. And the way he wrote it was just emotional. It made me sad. And from what he wrote, one thing I could think about were the following words. Here's what I wrote. By the way, time now 4:23. We'll wrap this up in less than 5 minutes. Quote, here's what I wrote. Every single hour, every single minute, and every single second from March 2, 1859 to March 3, 1859, there was crying, there was sobbing, there was wailing, there was bawling, and there was weeping. I'm hesitating now because I can only imagine, correction, I can't imagine the hell of what those 429 people went through. You know how you feel when you got to go to work and you leave your husband or you leave your wife at home, or you leave your son or daughter at home, knowing you'll be back in 8 or 9 hours. Can you imagine not just leaving them for 8 or 9 hours, but being taken from them, or they being taken from you? And not only are they taken away to a place you've never been before, you never heard of before, hundreds of miles away, thousands of miles away, they're not just gone. They're worked to death. They're beaten. They're raped. They're castrated. They're lynched from 1619 to 1865. But in this case, this happened in 1859. And the man, Pierce Meese Butler, who was responsible for this, who lived in Philadelphia, who owned property in Philadelphia, who used the money from these horrific sales to get bigger and better houses in Philadelphia. By the way, Want to know how much he earned? And we're talking about 2023 dollars. He earned, and let me read exactly what he earned from there, that time in terms of the value this time. It goes like this. From March 3 to March 2, exactly 429 of these Black human beings have been bought and sold for as little as $250 to as much as $1,750. So the least expensive Black person was sold for $250. The most expensive Black person was sold for $1,750. If you put those numbers in 2023 figures, that would have been the least expensive Black person would have been $9,011. The most expensive Black person would have been $63,078. And for all of this stuff, this guy was able to earn millions. In fact, it was a total of approximately $13 million in 2023 dollars that he earned from selling and trading and leasing our ancestors. So at the end of the article, this is what I write. Don't just remember those 429 and don't just perform libation for them. Also do this. Never forget, always avenge. And I conclude the article by writing this, especially the avenge part. Never forget, always avenge. And make sure you keep in mind that avenge part. Got about 60 seconds left, so let me just wrap this up by saying, please, the first Friday of every month, tune in here at PhillyCam, and you'll be able to check out TV Courtroom. By the way, if you want to check out PhillyCam, and make sure you tell your family and friends, you can always check out PhillyCam by watching us at Xfinity channels 66 and 966, checking us out at Fios channels 29 and 30, checking us out on demand, phillycam.org, on demand, phillycam.org, and also checking us out, PhillyCam Facebook live stream. In addition to all that, you can follow me and hear me and see me and interact with me here at TV Courtroom, but also at Radio Courtroom. That's at WURD 96.1 FM. That's Radio Courtroom, WURD 96.1 FM every Saturday from 1 p.m. until 3 p.m. Big shout out to Roland for putting that up on the screen. Check out my articles in the Philadelphia Tribune, my new articles at Pennsylvania Capital Star, my upcoming articles in Philadelphia Magazine. If you want to know all the stuff that I'm doing, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. Twitter is simply at Michael Cord, MichaelCoard. That's on Twitter. Same thing, Instagram, Michael Cord, Michael. I'm going to end today's show like I end almost every show. Think Black, I'm out.